do not reproduce using seeds. What do they reproduce using?
Spores.
Spores. So they're going to be like the mosses. They're going to reproduce using spores. Now, one thing that we're going to see that's different is we can see the size of these plants is different. Ferns that I have here, the vase, and then the fronds that you have out on your desk, they're bigger. So ferns are definitely bigger than these little tiny moss plants that we have growing over here. And that's because ferns and everybody else we're going to talk about today, they all have vascular tissue. They're vascular plants. And I mentioned vascular tissue last time. It's xylem and phloem. It's the fluid, it's the tissue that they can transport water and food to all parts of the plant. So if you have this system of tubes now that can transport water and food long distances, you can grow bigger, right? Okay, you're not little tiny moss plants without the vascular tissue that has to stay wet all the time. Okay, you can actually grow bigger now. All right, so this is the ferns. So here we can see, the first thing I want you to notice is the generation that you're looking at here. When you look at a fern, or you look at the actual fern growing somewhere, what's in that vase, or these little guys that you see here, remember there's two generations. You've got sporophyte and gametophyte. What you're looking at when you look at a fern is the sporophyte generation. Okay, so you should know that. If I put this fern on the plant, what generation do I see? It is the sporophyte. Okay? Now, that's the dominant generation. And we'll talk about this in lecture a little bit too. In mosses, it's flipped. It's the only time it's going to be flipped. The dominant generation, which means the generation that can live on its own, is the gametophyte. Because remember, this little tiny sporophyte right here, you never see, I talked about this, you never see that little sporophyte by himself. He doesn't ever grow by himself. He emerges from the female gametophyte, and then he disperses his spores, and then pretty much he dries up and goes away. You will see moss in the gametophyte form all over the place, just like this one that I passed around earlier. You'll never see sporophytes by themselves. They will always be attached to the female gametophyte. In ferns, it switches, and for all other plants, it switches. Sporophyte generation is the dominant generation. Okay? Now, how do you know you're looking at a sporophyte? What does a sporophyte produce? The sporophyte generation produces spores. All right, so look at your fern leaf that you have. Okay, first of all, we call these leaves on a fern, we call them fronds. Okay? It's called a frond. Okay? But you look on the back of this big one here. Everybody should have a big one at their table, correct? Brittany, you'll have one of these too, right? You just have to, okay, want this one, okay? Because the other one doesn't have the stuff I'm looking at yet. All right, this is a holly fern, okay? The name of this fern is the Boston fern, okay? On the holly fern, on the back, I want you to see all these little spots, right? You see all those little spots. Those spots are called sori. They make spores. So you know you're looking at the sporophyte generation. Because on the back here we see that there are the spore-producing structures called the sori. Got it? Now even if you can't, so like over here on the Boston fern, my Boston fern is not producing sori yet. Okay? But, so that might confuse you. Well, don't let it confuse you because it doesn't matter. When you look at a fern growing, it does not matter what kind of fern you're looking at. It can be a Boston fern, a holly fern, a staghorn fern, whatever kind of fern it is. You will always be looking at the sporophyte generation, okay? Always. Now, the young leaves have a name that's special. Now, some of y'all have got the little ones here, like this. Okay? Some of y'all have got a larger one. Well, this one didn't get enough water. Okay. That one looks a little better. Okay? This one looks a little better. The one that Melissa's holding up looks even better. So some of them were in contact with the water and the base a little bit better. But they're standing upright like this. Okay, this is that coiled structure that you saw in the video that I showed y'all. You didn't know what they were called at that point, probably, maybe not. So we call these guys fiddleheads. Fiddleheads and you saw those in the video, you saw the fiddlehead unfurl, and it formed, and what's going to happen is, well, not this little guy because he's going to be dead now, but this little guy right here is going to uncurl, and it will become one of these. Okay? So, and then the little tiny ones that you had, that you might have, these little tiny ones happen to be fiddleheads from the Boston fern over here. Okay?
So fiddleheads form fronds?
Fiddleheads are the young leaves of a fern. The young, immature ones, the new ones. They will become mature fronds when they open up. Some of them are edible. There's about 10 species of fern fiddleheads that you can eat. Okay? You typically, what you'll do with them is, I've never eaten them, I've only seen them cooked. We were talking about this morning, they're not something that's cultivated, so people aren't growing fronds to like they're growing tomatoes. Okay? So it just depends on, maybe where you are, what region you are. In the United States, around here, probably not a whole lot of them are growing. So you think, more of a foresty area that's a cooler climate probably. But they saute them. So they kind of saute them like you would saute, a green bean or something like that. Okay. I don't know that you probably can boil them, I guess. I don't know. The ways I've seen them prepared are mostly sauteed. I haven't seen any around any of the grocery stores, Kroger, H-E-B. If you maybe go to like one of the foo-foo grocery stores like Whole Foods or maybe like Central or like Fresh Market down by the mall, maybe they have fancy fiddleheads. I don't know. But there are about 8 to 10 species that are actually edible. You can eat them. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to look at some slides. And we're going to look at the fern slides first. And what we're going to look at is we're going to look at some of those sori. So the first slide that you want, so if you haven't got your slide box and your microscopes yet, go ahead and do that.
Is it on?
All right, the slides we're going to look at first are fern sori.
Fern sori.
And then the fern prothallis. That's the other one we want to look at. So 2 fern slides.
Fern sori.
Pasa picture, is it in the bottom?
No.
Also, in your book, in your lab manual, there are pictures of the fern life cycle and the structures we are looking at on page 364 to 367. We'll be looking at those.
You want me to help you? No quieres help me. You want me to help you? Yeah. Yo lo tengo. Yo lo veo. Okay. Es que pensé que estos eran estos. Okay. Yeah.
Kind of looks like shells.
Ahí está.
I'm focusing it.
All right, so here's what we're going to look at. What you're looking at is a fern leaf. So you're looking at a fern frond. I want to point out to you that you can see these little lines running through there. Those little lines are called veins. Those veins are something that we haven't really paid attention to before, but they're not present in the moss plants. So they're only going to be present here in lab when we start talking about the ferns. And those veins are going to be where the tissues, xylem and phloem, are going to be located. So think about them just like our veins and our arteries are. They transport stuff throughout our body. That's what these guys are going to do. These veins are filled with xylem and phloem, transport water and food. So you're looking at a leaf, okay? So just kind of like the leaf you have on your table. Each of these little clusters that you see here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, This guy just kind of broke free, so he's kind of part of this one. They are equal to the little brown dots you see on the back of your fern frond. They're the same thing. So those are sorus. One is sorus. So just to make sure that we understand some plural and singular here. One would be a sorus. All of these would be sori. Okay, sori is plural. If I picked out one little circle, like on the back of your frond here, I would say I'm looking at a sorus. Okay, so you pick one little brown dot. One little brown dot is a sorus. All of them on the back of one of these little leaflets would be the sori. Got it? It's just singular and plural.
On here it says spores. Do we need to know it as?
I haven't gotten that yet. I'm getting there, Brittany.
Getting there.
All right, each little cluster is a sporangium. And then the little tiny, I should probably draw that just a little bit. You always are ahead of it. Just give me a minute, I'll get there. Promise. All right, each little circle is called a sporangium. So let me just make it a little bit clearer here. One of those little circles is a sporangium. Inside the sporangium are the spores. Now, I don't care if you call this a sorus or a sori. Either one is fine. Singular or plural, just they don't mean different things. Okay, they don't mean different things. They're the same things.
So if you were just looking at that slide, for example, say there's 5, those all would be sori.
Yep, that's
Okay.
a collection of sori.
Okay.
So on the test, I don't care if you call that, if it's pointing to this, if you call this whole thing a sorus or a sori, I don't care.
Okay.
Either one's fine. Just one's singular, one's plural. It's just the test. Each little circle is a sporangium. The little dots inside are spores. So you can see that they kind of look like the spores that we looked at with the mosses. Okay, so they look very similar.
You can just call it.
So what you can see here is each one of these little kind of red structures, those are all spores that are inside the sporangium. So a sorus or sori is just a cluster of those sporangiums that are hanging around together. So when you look at the fern frond that you have, and you look at that one little brown circle, that one little brown circle is going to have a whole bunch of smaller circles in it, correct? Which are sporangium. And inside those smaller circles are going to be even smaller individual disc-like things that we would call spores. Got it? Make sense? Okay, so listen. The spores, we just talked about the beginning of this in lecture. The spores, are they haploid or are they diploid?
Haploid.
They're haploid. Okay, the sporophyte is the diploid generation. Okay? But the little sporangiums here, these little guys are going to make haploid spores by meiosis. Got it? Then that little spore is going to fall to the ground. Okay? And you can kind of follow this by what's happening here. Let's try to switch real quick. I'm going to switch between these two. See if I can switch real quick. He's going to let me switch easily or not. So let's talk about the generations that we've got going on here. So here is a sorus. One of these little guys is a sorus, a cluster. There's the little circular disc called the sporangium. Inside that sporangium are spores, right? So the spores are produced by meiosis, and there the spores are released, right? The things inside those individual circles of sporangium are going to be released. The wind is going to carry them, they're going to fall to the ground, and they're going to germinate, correct? The sporophyte, or the spore, from the sporophyte generation, falls to the ground and germinates into the gametophyte generation, right? From this, our new gametophyte is going to grow. So we're going to look at a new gametophyte, a new fern gametophyte. One of those spores drops to the ground, grows into this thing right here. This whole thing right here is called a prothallus, fern prothallus. This is very small. This lives long enough just to simply produce the gametes by mitosis, the haploid gametes by mitosis, and then it shrivels up and dies. So this one does not live independent like the sporophyte over there. This produces gametes and then dies. You probably won't even be able to see this growing. It's fairly tiny, okay? So we're going to look at this guy. So that slide we're going to look at is called the fern prothallis. So you can kind of see, there he is. He kind of looks like the thing that was in your lab manual there.
Which one is that one?
The slide is called the fern prothallis. It should be, if everybody's numbered correctly, it should be in slot 82. So it kind of looks like the one that was in your book. Now I'm going to move over to a different one. I'm going to move over to the bigger one here. Your slide may have a lot on there. Okay. So, he's just bigger so I can look at him a little bit better. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is, first of all, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the gametophyte generation. This is the gametophyte. What does the gametophyte generation make?
Gametes.
Gametes. This whole thing, this whole gametophyte generation that I'm looking at right here is called the fern prothallis. That's what we call the gametophyte generation of a fern. It's called the prothallis. Alright, so specific things. You see these long thread-like things here. These long thread-like things we've seen before. We've seen it in fungi. These are the rhizoids. They help to anchor that little gametophyte generation down into the ground, but then wash away, that kind of thing. Now, this is different than the mosses because this one is going to be produced, the spores are produced on the gametes, are produced on the same plant, both male and female. So this is what we would have learned in lecture day as being homosporous. Both male and female gametes are found on the same structure. Up here at the top you can see a cluster here. Those are the archegonia. What's inside the archegonia? Egg is inside there. So what sex would this be? This would be female. I gotta tweak it just a little bit. Kind of down here at the bottom, you'll kind of see, it's hard on this one, the resolution isn't very good. You'll see some structures that are kind of circular, that have like lots of little dots in them. Okay? They don't show up tremendously well on this one. These are the antheridia. What cells are produced inside the antheridia? Sperm. Thus making them what sex? Male. Okay?
What phylum is it?
This is phylum Pterophyta right here. We're talking about the ferns.
The last one too, right?
Huh?
The last one that we did too?
Yes. Yes. We're just looking at the two different generations. We just looked at the sporophyte, now we're looking at the gametophyte generation. Alright, so the sperm are motile, they're going to swim to the egg. When the sperm and the egg get together, what are we going to make? Egg plus sperm equals what? A zygote. What generation will that zygote develop into? Sporophyte. Which will be what? Haploid or diploid?
Haploid. Diploid.
Egg is haploid, sperm is haploid, zygote is diploid, sporophyte's diploid. It'll grow into a fern. Got it? Now we're almost to this point in lecture here where we're going to talk about all of this, but so hopefully you'll hear this several times here, that when we talk about it in class on Tuesday, it'll click.